I have been interested in Cuban music since 1938, says Dizzy Gillespie. In the Latin Breakdown documentary, Dizzy says that Chano bought him a composition. We're speaking of Chano Pozo, and they named it Manteca. Dizzy then gives an example of what the bass line sounded like. Then he says, this is the first time in jazz where the bass player wasn't going boom, 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 the traditional walking bass line. Some have said Dizzy was wrong, but was he? They take us back to a song called A Night in Tunisia, composed in 1942. Manteca was composed in 1947. This was 5 years later. So the contention is that Dizzy made a mistake or did not remember that he did this. A Night in Tunisia was originally recorded by Sarah Vaughan. It was called Interlude, A Night in Tunisia. The Sarah Vaughan version, which was slower, was recorded in 1944. The later version in 1946 is clearly different and contains the same type of Latin bass line. Remember, he was inspired by Mario Bauza, the great Cuban musician. The main point that should be emphasized is that both Night in Tunisia and Manteca were inspired by the Afro-Caribbean Latin sound. So when he says this was the first time this was done in jazz, could he have been speaking about the Latin sounds that both of these songs contain when it comes to the bass line? After all, these were both his songs.
The following interview is taken from A Night in Tunisia, heard on All Things Considered, September 3rd, 2000. In 1942, Dizzy Gillespie had never spent a night in Tunisia, but he was starting to travel to new places musically. While A Night in Tunisia is one of Gillespie's earliest compositions, you can already hear two trademarks of his music: Afro-Cuban rhythms and his innovative approach to harmony and melody, which would fuel a jazz revolution called bebop. Gillespie's solo break on the tune remains one of the most dramatic moments in jazz. His use of Latin rhythm marked a rare departure from the standard walking bass line of 1940s jazz. A Night in Tunisia plays a very important role in being one of the first compositions to have something that's very common today, which is a non-walking bass line. Trumpeter John Faddis says when Gillespie came to New York in 1937, the great Cuban trumpeter Mario Bauza took him to hear music in Spanish Harlem. Years later, in his autobiography, Gillespie wrote that he'd always had that Latin feeling, that even his early tunes sounded Latin. He said it was like putting West Indian hot sauce in some black-eyed peas or hot Cuban peppers in a dish of macaroni. Something to think about.